Ever wonder, how could someone starting with nothing, absolutely nothing, reshape the whole world? Not just like one country, but continents.
It's a pretty wild thought, right? Like it pushes the limits of what we think is possible for a single person, yeah. How does that kind of change even
I
start?
know, right? And today we're diving into the life of someone who actually did that. Genghis Khan. Yeah, forget that cartoon villain image. We're going beyond that. We're going to explore this amazing and, let's be honest, often pretty brutal journey of this guy. Started as Temujin out on the Mongolian steppe, and how he goes from that to founding this massive, huge empire.
And like any deep dive into history, the story, well, it isn't always a straight line. Our main source, this incredible insider account, is The Secret History of the Mongols. But we also have these echoes, right, of another key text, the Altan Debtor, which is, the Golden Book. Sadly, it hasn't survived, but you can see its influence in these later Chinese writings. Chronicles like The History of Yuan and the Sengwu Qinzheng Lu, which is basically record of the holy warrior's personal campaigns.
So it's a bit like we're putting together a puzzle, but some pieces are missing, and maybe someone came along and repainted them, depending on who was telling this story, right?
Exactly. You have to consider, the Mongolian sources, they might focus on the heroic rise, while the Chinese accounts, well, they'd probably highlight the impact of the Mongol conquests on their own dynasties.
So navigating these different perspectives, even the different languages these sources were written in, that's part of what makes Genghis Khan so fascinating.
Totally.
And that brings us to you, our listeners, joining us on this deep dive. We don't just want to throw dates and battles at you, right? We want to get to the core of this guy, those key moments, what drove him, and the massive changes he unleashed. We're after those insights that, stick with you without getting bogged down in all the details.
We're cutting through all the noise to get you to the heart of this complex, extraordinary person.
All right, let's jump in. Temujin. He's born in the Khenti Mountains sometime between 1155 and 1167. Eldest son of Yasugai, a chieftain of the Borjing clan, and his wife, Hulun. Even his birth name, Temujin, hints at the strength he'll embody, doesn't it? Like it often gets linked to iron or blacksmith, suggesting this built-in toughness.
Yeah.
But his early life, well, it was anything but tough and secure.
Oh, it was rough. Around when he's 8, his father, Yasugai, dies. And to make things even worse, his tribe abandons the whole family. Imagine that. Going from, the relative safety of a chieftain's family to being completely destitute out on the steppe. And this early trauma, it wasn't just some, random event. It really instilled in him this deep distrust of tribal loyalties, something that would become a major theme in how he structured his empire later on.
Yeah, I mean, that's harsh for anyone, let alone a kid. And to really show just how brutal this environment was, we have sources saying that Temujin even killed his older half-brother, had to secure his own position within the family. A defining moment and a brutal one.
For sure. It shows how much pressure there was to just survive, how ruthless the steppe could be. It's a world away from a peaceful childhood. Really tells you something about what he was up against and the choices he had to make just to survive, to protect his closest family.
But even in those early, desperate years, Temujin had something special. Charisma. People were drawn to him. And even as a young man, he starts gathering followers. And crucially, he makes alliances with 2 important steppe leaders. Jamuka, who becomes his Ainda, basically, his blood brother, and Togrul, the Khan of the Kharid tribe, a powerful guy. These weren't just casual friends, they were lifelines.
Absolutely. These alliances, especially the one with Togrul, prove crucial when Temujin's wife, Berta, who he'd just married, gets kidnapped. Rescuing her with their help, that was a huge moment, showed everyone his commitment and his growing power. And Berta, by the way, she's going to become his senior wife, a very influential figure, and gives him his most important sons.
But as Temujin gets more powerful, his relationship with Jamuka, it starts to fall apart. That classic clash of ambitions.
Exactly. It was strong at first, but then the pressure of competing for power in the same area, well, it took its toll. Brotherhood turned into rivalry and then outright war. The steppe just wasn't big enough for both of them. And in these early fights, Temujin actually loses pretty badly around 1187, so, it wasn't some easy path to the top.
A serious setback. And this is where things get interesting. Some modern historians suggest that in the decade after this defeat, Temujin might have spent a good chunk of time as, get this, a servant, maybe even a slave, to the Eurasian dynasty in North China. If true, it's a pretty unexpected twist.
It's quite a revelation, and, not surprisingly, the Mongol sources don't mention this at all. It doesn't fit the whole image of a continuous rise to power, does it? But a Chinese chronicler, Zhao Hong, in his Mengda Bailu, He mentions it directly.
So we have this conflict in the historical record. Why do some historians think the Chinese account might be true, even though it seems counterintuitive given what happens later with the Mongols?
Well, there are a few reasons. First, seeking refuge, or even taking a lower position across the border, it wasn't unheard of for steppe leaders who'd lost their power or even disgraced Chinese officials. Second, the way Temujin suddenly reappears around 1196 with a lot more power, it's hard to explain otherwise. The theory is that this period, while definitely humiliating, could have given him invaluable insight into how a large, complex state worked, how their military operated. He could have seen their strengths and their weaknesses up close. And later, when he conquers the Jin, this whole servitude thing, it would have been a huge embarrassment. So they probably left it out of their own records. Zhao Hong, writing from a different perspective, he wouldn't have cared as much. So beyond just, historical curiosity, this might show us something important about Temujin's rise. Maybe his adaptability was key. A future emperor learning the ropes from the bottom up, turning a potential humiliation into a strategic advantage.
That's a powerful thought. This guy who will rule millions, spending years as a servant in the very empire he'll crush later, has a whole new layer to his character. So by 1196, he's back. What's next?
He starts rebuilding his power base, fast. He renews his alliance with Togrul the Kublai Khan. Togrul, he needs loyal followers to hold onto his own position, so he welcomes Temujin back. A relationship born out of necessity, you could say.
A temporary alliance, right.
Yeah.
We know how this ends. Togrul starts seeing Temujin's growing influence as a threat, doesn't he?
Exactly. Temujin's followers are increasing, his reputation is growing, and this naturally makes Togrul suspicious and jealous. It all comes to a head in 1203 when Togrul, listening to his advisors, launches a surprise attack on Temujin. Complete betrayal.
Risky move for Togrul, and it backfires. Temujin, having learned those hard lessons about survival and betrayal, well, he wasn't totally caught off guard.
No, he's surprised at first, but he manages to retreat, regroup his forces, and then, showing his resilience and growing military skills, he defeats Togrul. The once mighty Kublai Khan gets killed while trying to escape. Not a glorious end.
With Togrul gone, Temujin sets his sights on the other major power, the Naiman tribe. It's like he's systematically taking out any potential rivals.
Yeah, exactly. The Naimans were a force to be reckoned with. The Battle of Chekirmun in 1204, that was a major clash. The Mongols win decisively. The Naiman leader, Taing Khan, is killed, and his son Kushlug, he runs west. This will actually be important later on in Central Asia.
And then there's Jamuka, his blood brother. Their rivalry has been running through this whole story. How does that end in this final push for power?
Jamuka, in a desperate attempt to stay relevant, he sides with the Naimans. But after their defeat, his own followers, they can see which way the wind is blowing, so they betray him, hand him over to Temujin. The secret history, it describes this poignant final meeting. Jamuka knows it's over, so he asks Temujin to execute him honorably, and his old Damaida grants him this request. But other accounts say it wasn't so honorable. Whatever the details, with Jamuka gone, Temujin is the undisputed ruler of the entire Mongolian steppe. This long, bloody process of unification is finally over.
So, 1206. A huge turning point. Temujin, now in charge of a unified Mongolia, he calls this massive assembly a Kurultai at the source of the Onan River. And here, he takes on the title that will change history, Genghis Khan.
It's true. And historians still debate what this title actually means. Some think it was a brand new title made up for this occasion, signifying that Temujin was above the Gurkhan title that Jamuka had. Others say it's about strength, firmness, maybe even righteousness. There's even this really interesting theory that connects it to the Turkic word Tengiz, meaning ocean, so master of the ocean or universal ruler, because, the ocean was seen as encircling the world. But more than just the name, the Kurultai itself was hugely significant, right? It was a grand council where major decisions were made.
Yeah, so even his title has this aura of power, ambition. But it wasn't just about a new name, was it? It was about building a new society, a new kind of state.
Definitely. Genghis Khan knew the old ways. With the tribes and their constant rivalries, that wouldn't work for a large, expanding empire. So he starts what some historians call a social revolution, his main goal: to replace those tribal loyalties with loyalty directly to him and his family.
Okay, but how do you break apart centuries of ingrained tribal loyalty? That seems nearly impossible.
Well, he implements these radical social and military reforms. First, he reorganizes Mongol society based on a military decimal system. Every man who can fight, he's conscripted into units of 10 Arban, then 100 Dragoon, then 1,000 Minkan. But these weren't just military units, they were social and administrative units too. Like, a minkin of soldiers was also supported by a minkin of households. Super organized, super integrated.
So it wasn't just about organizing the army, it was about reshaping society, breaking those tribal lines,
Yeah.
and creating a shared Mongol identity under the Khan.
Exactly. And he also establishes the Altan Yurik, the Golden family. The top tier of the social hierarchy reserved for Genghis and his direct relatives. They were often called the White Bone. Below them was the Karyasun, the Black Bone. That included any surviving aristocracy from the tribes before the empire, and new powerful families that rose up through their loyalty and service to Genghis. This new social order really cemented his power. And the crazy thing is, this system, it stuck. Even when the huge Mongol Empire eventually broke apart into those Khanates, it rarely broke along those old tribal lines. Genghis's descendants continued to hold power for centuries. Shows you how effective those early reforms were. So he's got his power solidified at home. Now Genghis starts looking outwards again. He deals with a potential threat from a powerful shaman, Kukachu. Right. Kokachu, a very influential shaman who held the Tengris title of Teb Tengri, he starts gaining political power, tries to cause trouble within Genghis's family. And Genghis, recognizing the danger to his authority, despite his own beliefs, well, he arranges for Kokachu to be killed. And in doing so, he kind of takes over the shaman's spiritual authority, a decisive move to eliminate any rivals, even those with spiritual influence.
Yeah, that's ruthless, consolidated power. And then the expansion begins, first north, then west, and a major turning point, the Uyghurs, in 1211, they voluntarily submit to Genghis. That must have been huge. A settled, advanced society choosing to join the nomadic Mongols.
Huge. The Uyghurs, led by their ruler Barchuk, they'd freed themselves from the Karakitai, which was in decline, and they decided to pledge allegiance to Genghis. This was the first time a complex, non-nomadic society willingly joined the Mongols, and they brought with them valuable skills and knowledge, like their writing system. The Uyghur script, it would be adapted for the Mongol language, becoming super important for record-keeping and governing.
And then the focus shifts to China. First, the Western Xia Kingdom in 1209. Why go after them? What were the main reasons for this initial move into China?
A few things were going on. They said it was retaliation because Western Xia had sheltered Togrul's son earlier. But practically speaking, it was about boosting the Mongol economy, get valuable goods, livestock, that sort of thing. And, very importantly, securing their southern border, subdue a potentially hostile neighbor. And it seems the Western Xia, their defenses were mostly focused on their borders with the Song and Jin dynasties, so their northern frontier was kind of vulnerable.
So almost a test to see what they could get away with. And it worked. Western Xia surrendered in 1210 after a pretty quick campaign.
Yeah, they agreed to the Mongol terms.
A quick win, but the real challenge, the big prize, was the Jin dynasty in northern China. That one took 4 long years, from 1211 to 1215, and they were much more powerful. What started that massive conflict?
Well, a bunch of things came together. Genghis personally disliked the Jin emperor, Wanyan Yongji. There was this old grudge over past Jin actions, especially the killing of Ambaghai Khan, who was a prominent Mongol leader back in the mid-12th century, and of course the promise of wealth and plunder for his troops. Plus, Genghis had seen the Jin dynasty's weaknesses, its instability. He saw an opportunity to strike.
So it was a calculated risk, even though the Jin could field a much larger army. And they were smart about the invasion too, weren't they? They used their alliance with the Ungud tribe to bypass the Jin's heavily fortified border defenses?
Yeah. And they didn't just go straight for conquest, this 3-pronged attack. It was about plundering too, weakening the Jin, making them look bad. And at the same time, they secured those key mountain passes, opening up the way to the North China Plain. The Jin, they suffered a series of defeats, and some of them actually switched sides, joined the Mongols. Mugwali's victory in the fall of 1211, that was a crucial moment.
But it wasn't all smooth sailing for the Mongols. Genghis himself got hurt during the siege of Xijing, which is modern-day Lantong, in 1212.
Yeah, an arrow. But this setback, it actually led to something important. The Mongols, they created a dedicated siege engineer corps. Genghis realized that to take those heavily fortified Chinese cities, they needed specialists, new technology. Over the next couple of years, they actively recruited hundreds of Jin experts. Adapting, learning from their enemies, that seems to be a recurring theme in Genghis Khan's success.
Totally. And even Juyang Pass, this major gateway to northern China, with its crazy defenses, Jebe, one of Genghis's best generals, he managed to sneak in 1213. That opened the way to the Jin capital, Zhongdu, which is modern-day Beijing.
Brilliant move. It completely broke through the Jin defenses, and at the same time, the Jin government was falling apart from the inside. The Khitans, who were under Jin rule, they rebelled, and in Zhongdu there was a coup. They assassinated the emperor, Yongji, who was unpopular, and put a puppet ruler in his place. This chaos helped the Mongols a lot.
But even with these amazing victories, the Mongols, they kind of overextended themselves, right? They were outside the walls of Zhongdu, this massive city, facing a determined enemy inside, and then epidemics and famine hit their own troops. There were even hints they had to resort to desperate measures to survive. Sounds like a really tough spot.
It was brutal. But Genghis, always the pragmatist, he realized they needed to negotiate. He gets a huge tribute from the Jin: gold, silver, silk, horses, slaves, even a Jin princess. In return, he lifts the siege in 1214.
But that wasn't the end of the fight with the Jin. They decided to move their capital south, to Kaifeng, and Genghis saw this as a betrayal, like they were just retreating to regroup to start the war again later.
Exactly. And at this point, many historians believe that Genghis made the decision to conquer all of northern China. The Mongols go back, and even though the people in Zhongdu initially surrender in 1215, the city is eventually taken after more fighting, and then it's brutally sacked. Mukwali, a very trusted general, he's left in charge to continue the campaign against the remaining Jin forces in the south. Genghis goes back to Mongolia early 1216 to deal with other issues.
So by 1215, the Mongols have control of a huge part of northern China. But Genghis Khan's ambition, it went far beyond the east. He turns his attention west again, dealing with rebellions and the remnants of the Kara Kitai.
Yeah. Up in Siberia, a Mongol governor named Korchi, he was corrupt, mismanaged things. The Hoyan-Urgan tribes, they rebelled. Sadly, Borakul, a close friend of Genghis Khan, was killed during this rebellion. So Jochi, Genghis's eldest son, is sent to crush it, and he does, reasserting Mongol control over this strategically important region. Meanwhile, Kuchlug, the Naiman prince who had fled east years earlier, he'd managed to take over the Korakitai, but he wasn't popular. He was tyrannical, especially towards the Muslims living there, so it was the perfect opportunity for the Mongols to step in.
And Genghis, always thinking strategically, he must have seen Kuchlug as a potential threat. So he sends Jebi, one of his most skilled generals, to deal with him.
Right. And Jebi's campaign, it's swift and it's effective. He uses this Mongol policy of religious tolerance, promising to protect religious freedom in the Korakitai territories. This wins over the local Muslims and basically undermines Kuchlug from within. Kuchlug gets captured, executed, and Jebi's victory brings the Korakitai into the growing Mongol Empire.
With the East and Central Asia relatively secure, Genghis now faces a new, powerful enemy to the west, the Khwarezmian Empire. This was a massive empire covering modern-day Central Asia, Persia, Afghanistan, and this is going to escalate into one of the most brutal, devastating campaigns of Genghis Khan's career. What was the trigger for this massive invasion?
It all starts with a breakdown in diplomacy and trade. Genghis had taken control of the Eastern Silk Road, and he wanted to expand trade with the Khwarezmian Empire, which controlled the western end. At first, things were good. Mongol envoys, caravans, they traveled freely. But then a large caravan of Mongol merchants carrying investments from Genghis Khan's own family, the Altan Uruk, they're ambushed and massacred in Otrar, a Khwarezmian city. The governor there, Inalchuk, he accuses them of being spies. Now, whether he acted alone or had the Shah's Muhammad II's approval, we don't know for sure.
So that's a serious provocation, killing envoys, especially those connected to the ruling family. But it gets even worse. Genghis, trying to find a peaceful solution, he sends an ambassador to the Khwarezmian court, wants justice, compensation. How do they receive this ambassador?
Terribly. Muhammad II, he refuses to apologize, refuses to make any amends for the massacre, and then he has the Mongol ambassador killed, and his whole delegation humiliated. This was unheard of, a complete violation of diplomatic rules. Genghis Khan was furious. He decides then and there he's going to personally lead an invasion of the Khwarezmian Empire. He leaves only a small force behind under Mukwali to keep fighting in China.
Wow. So this local incident, the killing of some merchants and then the murder of an ambassador, leads to this massive military response. Now, the Khwarezmian Empire was big, but it also had a lot of internal problems, didn't it?
Yeah. Muhammad II, he didn't trust his own generals. There were factions in his court. And he had a really bad relationship with his mother, Turkan Khatun, who was powerful. Some historians call it an uneasy diarchy. So they weren't unified. And because of all this, Muhammad II makes a huge mistake. Instead of meeting the Mongols in open battle where their cavalry would have been devastating, he spreads his forces out, puts them in garrisons in the cities. This played right into the Mongol strengths.
A fatal error. And the Mongols were masters of siege warfare after all their experience in China.
Exactly. They start besieging Otrar in the fall of 1219. It lasts 5 brutal months, but the city falls. Inalchik, that treacherous governor, he meets a gruesome end. Mongol vengeance. Meanwhile, Genghis Khan gets strategic. He divides his forces. He sends his sons Chagatai and Ugadai to continue the siege of Otrar, while he and his youngest son Tului, they take the main army across the Kizilkum Desert. It was harsh, unforgiving terrain, but this surprise maneuver gets them past the main Khwarezmian defenses. They come out behind the main cities and totally catch the garrison of Bukhara off guard.
That's brilliant and daring. He really understood military strategy and how to use the terrain, the speed, the scale of the Mongol advance. It must have been terrifying for the Khwarezmians.
Totally. Bukhara falls quickly in February 1220. And then Samarkand, Muhammad's own capital, just a month later. Muhammad is bewildered, his forces are demoralized, he's facing betrayals from his own people, so he flees west. Jebiz and Subutai, those same brilliant generals who took Juyong Pass in China, they chase him across Persia all the way to this tiny island in the Caspian Sea. That's where Muhammad dies, alone in despair, in the winter of 1220-21. He names his son, Jalal al-Din, as his successor.
But the Mongols, they don't stop. Jebi and Subutai, they embark on this incredible long-range raid around the Caspian Sea. It's one of the most amazing feats of endurance and intelligence gathering in military history.
The Great Raid, that's what they called it. It lasted years. This small Mongol force goes thousands of miles through unknown territory. They clash with the Georgians, even some of the Kievan Rus' principalities. That was the first real contact between the Mongols and Europe. Back in Khwarezm, the siege of Gurganj, the capital city, by Genghis's 3 eldest sons, Jochi, Chagatai, and Ugadai, that was a long, brutal affair. It finally ends in the spring of 1221 after fierce fighting, and the city is destroyed.
So even with Muhammad dead and his major cities fallen, there was still resistance. Jalal ad-Din, his son, he was actually a capable leader, at least for a while.
He was. He manages to gather some Khwarezmian forces in what's now Afghanistan. He even wins a battle against a Mongol detachment. But ultimately, his own commanders are divided, and the Mongols keep the pressure on. He suffers a major defeat at the Battle of the Indus River in November 1221, and he's forced to flee east into India.
And while all this is happening, Genghis Khan's youngest son, Tului, he's conducting this devastating campaign in the region of Khorasan. The accounts of the destruction, the loss of life, they're truly horrifying.
It was truly awful. Any city that resisted was completely destroyed. Nishapur, Merv, Herat, these were once flourishing centers of culture, learning, trade, some of the largest, wealthiest cities in the world at that time. They were utterly devastated. Persian chroniclers claim that millions died in the sieges of these cities alone. Now, historians today think those numbers are probably exaggerated, but it was still a demographic catastrophe on a scale that's hard to comprehend. Even the most conservative estimates put the death toll for the entire Khwarezmian campaign well over 1 million. This campaign cemented Genghis Khan's reputation in the West as this ruthless, almost apocalyptic figure.
It's a chilling reminder of the human cost of these conquests. But then, in 1221, Genghis Khan just stops his westward expansion. He's seemingly unstoppable, but he halts. Why the sudden change?
He thought about going after Jalal al-Din into India, but he realized that the climate, the terrain, the diseases in South Asia, they would hurt his army. And there were bad omens, which were a big deal for the Mongols. They spent some time putting down rebellions in Khorasan, but then they withdraw completely from further westward expansion. They set the Amu Darya River as the new western border. They didn't want to overextend themselves.
So a strategic decision, not because he lost his ambition. And on his way back east, he starts setting up ways to administer these new territories.
Exactly. He appoints these officials called Durgachi, basically imperial commissioners, responsible for keeping order, collecting taxes, literally press the seal of authority. Below them were Basquak, local officials who handled the day-to-day running of things, making sure Mongol policies were implemented. He also had this interesting meeting, historically significant, with the Taoist patriarch Changchun. They met in the Hindu Kush Mountains. And despite Genghis's own shamanistic beliefs, he was really interested in Changchun's teachings. He granted special privileges to Changchun's followers, even tax exemptions. It's a really fascinating interaction, this nomadic conqueror and a representative of a major philosophical tradition.
Yeah, and show you how pragmatic Genghis was, how intellectually curious he could be. And then, in early 1225, after years campaigning in the west, he's finally back in Mongolia. But he's not done fighting yet. The Western Chia, always causing trouble, they attract his attention again.
Yep. Even though he's getting older and he controls this massive empire already, Genghis spends most of 1225 preparing for this final campaign. It begins in early 1226 with the quick capture of Karakoto, an important city on their western border. The invasion continues with the same Mongol efficiency and brutality. Genghis orders the destruction of many cities along the Gansu corridor, showing no mercy to those who resist. By fall of 1226, they've crossed the Yellow River and are besieging Lingwu, a city very close to the western Xia capital, Zhongseng. The Mongols win a decisive victory against a large western Xia army in December 1226, basically sealing the fate of the kingdom. But Genghis himself, he's probably feeling his age by now and the illness that will soon kill him. So he leaves the siege of the capital to his generals and he heads south with a smaller force under Sudritai to raid and secure more territory within the Jin dynasty.
Sounds like he was relentless, driven by ambition even in his final years. But this campaign against Western Xia, it would be his last. During the winter of 1226-27, tragedy strikes.
Yeah. Genghis falls from his horse while hunting, and his health deteriorates quickly over the next few months. This slows down the siege of Zhongseng. His sons, his commanders, they urge him to go back to Mongolia to recover. But Genghis, he was apparently really angry about some insults from the Western Xia commander, and he refuses. He wants to finish the campaign. He dies in August of 1227, though the exact date is debated. And importantly, they keep his death a secret from most of the army and from the Western Xia who are still under siege. Imagine that, the pressure of keeping that secret, having to keep the army going even though their revered leader was dead.
Incredible discipline. And what happened to the Western Xia who had no idea Genghis Khan was dead?
They finally fall to the Mongols the next month. The city of Zhongseng is utterly destroyed and everyone inside is massacred. Many historians see this as the virtual annihilation of the Western Xia civilization, a very successful ethnocide, as chilling as that sounds.
Horrific. And the cause of Genghis Khan's death, it's still a mystery, isn't it?
It is. Different historical accounts say different things. Rashid al-Din, a Persian chronicler, and the official history of Yuan, they say it was a sudden illness, maybe malaria, typhus, even the plague. Marco Polo, writing decades later, he claims it was an infected arrow wound from a siege. Then there are accounts that say he was struck by lightning, which would have been seen as a powerful omen. And of course, there are legends. One story says a captured Western Xia princess, Gerbelchen, injured him fatally as a final act of defiance. So we have all these possibilities: disease, wounds, divine intervention, revenge.
Makes it even more intriguing. So with Genghis Khan gone, the big question was, who takes over? The Mongols, unlike some other empires, they didn't have a clear system for succession, right?
No, not really. Which often led to problems after a powerful leader died. They tended to follow ultimogeniture, the youngest son inheriting the land, the property. But who got to be the great Khan, that was much less clear. It depended on politics, who the dying Khan favored, and the support of the powerful Mongols. The secret history, it suggests that Genghis started thinking about this back in 1219, while others say the final decision came later. There were a few main contenders. His 4 sons by Berta, Yochi, Chagatai, Urgadai, and Tului, and his younger brother Timoga, though he was never really in the running for the top spot.
We know that Ögedei eventually becomes the great Khan. But getting to that decision, it wasn't easy, was it? There were issues between the brothers.
Definitely. Genghis Khan's relationship with his oldest, Jochi, that was particularly difficult. There were always questions about whether he was really Genghis' son because of Berte's kidnapping. And they also clashed over how to divide up the loot from their conquests, especially after they took Gurganj, which was super wealthy. Then Jochi dies unexpectedly in 1223, which made things even more complicated. Chagatai, the second son, he was known for being uncompromising, even abrasive. He and Jochi openly disliked each other, which caused problems in the family, and Genghis probably didn't like that. So that ruled him out as the main heir. So that leaves Urgadei and Tului.
And Tului was known for being a great military commander, wasn't he? He had those impressive victories in Persia, so why not him?
Well, Tului was a brilliant military mind, for sure. But Urgadei had other important qualities. He was generally liked, more generous, and he was good at delegating, trusting his subordinates, finding compromises. He was also seen as more committed to traditional Mongol ways. Tului's wife, Sorkaktani Beki, she was a Nestorian Christian, and she supported different religions. That made some of the more conservative Mongols nervous. So even though Urgadei liked to drink, Genghis saw in him someone who could keep the empire together, maintain stability. He valued those administrative and unifying skills over just military prowess.
And looking back, it seems like a good choice. It helped the empire stay stable and continue expanding after Genghis Khan's death. Let's talk a bit about his family. Berta, his senior wife, she was clearly important, gave him many influential children.
Berta, Temujin married her pretty early on, and she remained his most important wife throughout his reign. She bore him those 4 sons, Jochi, Chagatai, Ugadai, Tului, and at least 5 daughters. They all played important roles in the growing empire. Genghis was smart. He used the appanage system, giving land and rights to Berta's sons, setting up their own power bases in different regions, and he strategically arranged his daughters' marriages to rulers from allied tribes or kingdoms, forging those political bonds. So family wasn't just personal, it was a tool for building and keeping power. And these children, their descendants, they'd go on to rule the different Khanates that the Mongol Empire would break into the Golden Horde. The Chagatai Khanate, the Yuan dynasty in China, the Ilkhanate in Persia, they shaped Eurasia for centuries.
Yeah, the influence of his family lasted generations.
Hmm.
And we've talked about his actions, their huge impact. But what do we know about Genghis Khan as a person? What did he look like?